Hello, everybody, and welcome to the following panel on prevention of gender-based violence. My name is Shelly Kupferberg. I'll be your moderator today. Well, we are going to listen first to Elaine P. Congress, who will give us a brief input on the situation in the US and her experiences being a professor at Fordham University in New York at the School of Social Science, where she works with migrant and refugees families in the US from a multicultural perspective. Her input is followed by a discussion with different protagonists from the Netherlands, from Austria, and from Germany. And in any case, if you have questions or remarks on the topic, on things that going to be said, please don't hesitate to contribute. We want also to discuss certain points with you, the audience, of course, and are looking forward to get an idea of your experiences and questions. So please welcome now Professor Dr. Elaine P. Congress. Elaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your conference. It's very exciting. I'm here in the middle of New York City, and I'm real pleased to be here. Thank you, and guten Tag, and I'm glad that I can all talk to you. So, well, let me just tell you a little bit about about myself and what I'm going to talk about today. Maybe we can start the PowerPoint, please. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, today I'm going to talk about family violence in migrant and refugee families in the United States. And this is, a little bit about, who I am. And also, if you just move it ahead, I want to tell you a little bit. I've been very interested in migration for many years. I've written a number of books. Maybe could you move to the next slide, please? I've written multicultural perspectives in working with families at 4 editions. I'm working now on the 3rd edition of my book on social work with immigrants and refugees. And most recently, I have a UN book series, Behavioral Science in the Global Arena, and which is addressing major global issues, and certainly migration is a major issue. And I have 1 book in the series, and the other 2 are in print. Please advance, please. Okay, now I want to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today. First, I'm going to do a little. I guess I'm the only person from the United States who's presenting, so I'm going to do a little. U.S. and immigrant history, migration 101, a real simple introduction. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about legal categories, and I think each of our countries have different laws governing immigrants. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that. Then I'm going to get into the main part of my presentation, which will be about family violence. I'm going to talk about the causes, the incidents, and the effects both on women and children. Then, a big focus of this conference, judging even from the title of the conference, is prevention. So I'm going to talk about prevention. And then last but certainly not least, this is where we are now, I'm going to talk about intervention. I'm talking about international UN interventions. I'm going to talk about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, both national and local, to help cope with family violence. And finally, I'm going to talk about immigrant initiatives that immigrant groups have developed to address family violence. Okay, so let's proceed with 101. Okay, now we know about the United States. We've always considered ourselves a nation of immigrants, and we say everyone's an immigrant here unless they're American Indian. We have 45 million immigrants, and these are people who were born in other countries. A big focus of our immigration policy is family reunification. So, for example, if one family member is here, then they can sponsor other family members from coming in. Our early immigration has changed. Where initially it was immigrants from England and Scotland and Ireland and Germany. There are many Germans, and in fact, I'm of German descent 3 generations ago, and there are many people of German descent here in the United States. And our current migration, primarily people from Latin America and Asia. Okay, can you move ahead, please? Okay, now this is very brief. These are just some definitions, and we use them sometimes interchangeably, but just a very quick story about what these names are. Refugees themselves, the word, it means these are UN sanctioned. Every country around the world lets in a certain number of refugees, and these are people who've had to flee because of persecution, because of their race or their religion or their belonging to a social group, their nationality. So these are refugees. But there also are asylum seekers, and these are people who come here and who are afraid of going back, so they ask for asylum. Then we have a large number of approved immigrants. These are called green card holders, and these are people awaiting citizens. We have many people here who are naturalized U.S. citizens, weren't born here, but became citizens. And then we have undocumented immigrants, and these are people who have come here either over our southern border with Mexico, or else people who have overstayed visas and just continued to stay here. So let's see. Now, could you move ahead, please? Okay, now I'd like to talk more about family violence. First, and what is it? And I know many of the people here who are speaking today, and also who are attending, know a lot about this. But I just want to say just very briefly about family violence. First, and we talk so much about physical family violence, but it's also important to think about emotional and financial family violence that occurs. Now, in terms of stats, 1 out of 4 women, and then I was surprised to see this, 1 out of 7 men, because this often is very hidden, and 1 out of 15 children are affected by family violence. And also there's some feeling that this may be underreported because of stigma, fear, and also in terms of immigrants, because of fear of deportation. Okay, can we move ahead, please? Why is there an increase in violence, and especially among immigrants? And I've been thinking a lot about this, and also based on my experience. I'm an academic now and I write, but I worked as a practitioner for many years in an agency serving immigrants, and I saw a lot of family violence. Why is there an increase? First thing, there's a lot of stress of adjusting to the unknown. And sometimes our culture the US is very different from where people have come from. So there's a lot of stress involved with that. Then a lot of, especially refugees, had very traumatic experiences before migrating here. And this also contributes to a lot of unrest and violence within homes. Then we also see there are different cultural norms about male-female relationships, about marriage being kind of more equal. I think which are more like what we believe in the United States, and I think also in Germany. But many immigrants come from different backgrounds, so this is a real change when they kind of adjust to what it's like living in the United States. Then there are economic stresses, and we probably don't have enough economic social support for immigrants, and this often leads a woman to stay with a spouse or partner who's abusive. And also, I thought about the impact that we've all been impacted around the world with COVID, and how it's led to hibernation, and because there has been a real increase in family violence, people have to live in very close quarters, and this is a particular problem in urban settings. And also it's been noted that there's really been an increase in alcohol abuse for people being forced to stay at home, and this also contributes to family violence. And also, last but not least, and I'm embarrassed about this, because as you know, the United States, you read the papers, you know, we don't have a good reputation in terms of our guns, and having guns really increases family violence and dangerous, life-threatening family violence. Did you? Okay. Well, okay, but it's underreported, and it's underreported. Why? How is it? Why is it unreported? Many women don't go to report it because there are many sayings, and you know, I don't know how to say them in German, but you know, like what happens in the family stays in the family. Don't wash your dirty linen in public. Home is a man's castle. All these things tend to keep family violence within the home and not shared publicly. I found in working with immigrants, there's a lot of family pressure. There's an expectation of being, you know, a good wife, and there's a concern that divorce will bring shame on one's family, and then you kind of made your situation continue there. So there are cultural norms. There's also a feeling of hopelessness. What will the police do? And there's fear of financial loss. And really, I'm dependent upon the man in the household to bring home money to feed yourself and your children. And finally, last but not least, there's a real fear of deportation that leads many women, many undocumented women, to not go to the police to ask for help. So could you please advance? Now let's talk a bit about prevention, which is really kind of a main theme of this conference. And this is really a unique U.S. problem. We need to change our laws about guns, and it's very political in my country, but we're working on it. Then I was thinking, how can we change it? It begins with education. We have to think, even in kindergarten, you know, to educate children not to be violent. And then I was thinking, maybe we don't pay enough attention to it even within our schools. We think, oh, boys will be boys, they're just fighting, this won't last. So we have to look and identify and work with violence even in primary school. Then I also just want to say that ethnic organizations are very involved in fight, and there are newspapers, there are services to kind of educate people about family violence and about avoiding it in their families. Could you please, I'm moving along. Okay. Now let's look, but unfortunately, we're probably not doing enough with prevention. So let's talk about where we are now. And I see this at 4 levels, and I divided it international, global level. We know, and I think you probably know about Sustainable Development Goals, and number 5 has to do with gender equality. And one of the targets says to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls, but in their private spheres, which really has to do within the home. So this is really good. So this is a big UN mandate, but in reality, and this is upsetting, 49 countries lack laws to protect women against domestic violence. I'm happy to report that not US, or Germany, but there are 49 other countries out there that don't even have any laws to protect women against domestic violence. And also at the UN, there's a major agency for dealing with women's issues. Then next is national government and laws. And our governments play a major role in protecting women. And we have many laws against physical violence. Also, I found here in the United States, police education about how to handle family violence. Because often a call is made, we have 911, and police will come out. So they're the first responders, and we have to educate them how to deal sensitively with family violence issues. And this is something we've done here in New York. I mean, we've spoken at the police academy for incoming police about how to deal with family violence. And then also, and I think maybe in Germany may do better with this, I mean, we need more social support, social protective system, and financial support for women and children. So I mean, this is something else that we really need to work on. Could you? Okay. Now let me just talk about. This is a real positive thing that we're doing here. We have what's called VAWA, and it's been in effect for a long time, 1994. I mean, that's how many years? That's 25, more than 25 years now. But many people don't know even that it exists. And this is a way to deal with women's fear of deportation, because it seems that if a woman is married, an undocumented woman is married or lives with someone who's a citizen, they can say, okay, well, you call the police and you're out of here. You go back to Mexico or wherever you came from. But your children who are born here get to stay here. So you can imagine how upsetting that is for women. So we've all been, kind of working on trying to help immigrant women to seek relief under this law. And also they are able to get a U visa, which is so that's also can help keep them here in the United States. Can you move, please? Okay. Now there are many nonprofit organizations that work with family violence issues. And there's really been a change, and I've lived long enough and worked long enough in the field to see the change. In the beginning, they were really mainly women sponsored, and there were battered women's shelters, and men were included at all. Now there's a new effort is really to involve the whole family. And there are many efforts to work with, with abuse. And so this is a change, and I think a positive change, because you can't work with just one part of the system. You have to, think of the whole family. And these are just some examples of organizations that work on family violence. Some of them, it's a main agenda. For others, it's one of many agendas. But these are examples of, of some groups that that work on family violence. Could you please move it? These are others that that work, and you can see some of these are major ones, like Child Welfare League, major organization. Some of them are specifically connected to sexual violence issues within the home, rape, abuse, and incest network. The Battered Women's Justice, Safe Horizon. Some of them are local. Safe Horizons is really big in New York, working on family violence. And then I also mentioned 24-hour domestic helpline. In New York, we have a lot of 24 hours, because domestic violence doesn't occur 9 to 5, the hours for most of them occur. I mean, it occurs at midnight. And so we have very often the 24-hour kind of helplines, which is really a very good intervention. Could you please move it? Okay, now I also want to mention there are many ethnic immigrant groups that work with domestic violence. And in some ways it's really better because they understand the culture better. And also they have bilingual staff. And this is a real issue, that very often organizations don't have bilingual staff. So this is something that immigrant organizations, are bilingual themselves, and they have staff to help with. Because even if a woman can speak English, usually when she's really under pressure and under threat, she can only speak her native language. And these are just examples. The Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence and Latino Coalition that works specifically on these issues. Could you please advance? Okay, now this is a quick summary that I think we all have to work together. But we have different disciplines and different ethnic backgrounds, but we all have to be focused on working together to resolve it. And it's very important that it doesn't remain hidden, I mean, I hate to think it was 1 or 4 women are affected, and we know that. What is it really? And I think, I mean, many women have experienced it at some point in their life. Then it's also important to realize that family violence is not only physical violence. And this is something we're more likely to acknowledge physical violence if a woman goes to an emergency room with a black eye. But what about psychological abuse that may occur for many, many years, right? And may have a really long-term effect on the women as well as their children. And I just want to say a little something about children. Children are very negatively affected, and they may carry on to their, later lives. It's called, in the U.S. and probably other places, we talk about ACEs, and that says aversive childhood experiences, and family violence rates very high. And also, there's a concern that children were perpetuated. Children who have witnessed family violence in their home, when they grow up and they get married or live with someone, that then they're going to continue to have family violence. And finally, our focus should be on prevention. Very important. And we won't have to have these agencies for dealing with family violence if we really focus more on getting to the roots and preventing. So this is a little bit about what I wanted to say. Could you move ahead, please? Okay, this is who I am, Congress, and my email is very simple, congress@fordham.edu. And I look on this as the first time that we've all met, but hopefully not the last. So, please get in touch with me if you'd like to talk more, if you'd like to be involved in some of the different activities and programs that I am. And let's continue our conversation. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I look forward to the rest of our program. And I guess Shelly is going to be organizing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for this input that gave us an overview of the situation in the US. I would like now to introduce the panel, and I'm pleased that we have with us Reem Alksiri from Amsterdam, who's now sitting in Berlin. Lawyer from Syria, expert on human rights for women and sexual minorities. She's involved in the project Universal Jurisdiction Center for the Enforcement of Human Rights International. Hello, Reem. Hello. Then we have Lyane Sautner here, Professor Dr. Lyane Sautner from Linz, from Austria, from the Johannes-Kepler-University. Lyane Sautner is Vice President of the Victim Support Organization Weissering Austria, was on the board of Victim Support Europe some years ago from 2010 to 2013. Hello, Lyane. Please welcome with me Professor Dr. Thomas Wenzel from Vienna, Medical University of Vienna. He is a chairperson of the World Council for Psychotherapy Working Group on Migrants and Refugees. And we have some support, hello Thomas, from Professor Dr. Jan Kizilhan and from Ramazan Salman as well, who are the ones who organized actually and initiated this kind of Congress. Yeah, first of all, I would ask you, Thomas and Reem, if we look at developments around the world in terms of gender-based violence, are there any trends that you observe in terms of this topic? And if so, why? Who wants to start? Reem, maybe you?
Want me to start? Or
Reem?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with and I kind of alluded to in my presentation, COVID. I mean, I think it's really scary, and I think that, and I don't know if all the stats are in yet, but I think there's been an increase in family violence with people being stuck at home, and also people being upset, anxious, depressed. And also an increase in substance abuse, with an alcohol abuse, with people being in their home. So I don't think the current trend is good, but I think what is good is we have it more in mind to try to deal with. So I see this as positive.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask others as well. Thomas, maybe you can tell us something, because we heard a lot in the news about this increasing domestic violence issue in terms of the COVID pandemic, but maybe you can tell us a bit more information about this kind of trends. Do you have an overview?
Well, we have the data are controversial here also because the quality of reporting and the lack of good research on the issue. I think there must be a lot of research that is necessary and should be done, but wasn't published so far. But I agree with Elaine Congress's, I think definitely an increase in violence when people are stuck. We already discussed in the morning, it's already very difficult for migrants and refugees in Europe if they are stuck in some form of transitional situation where they have no permanent status, where they have to live in a refugee camp or in primitive environments with their families in one room, and no clear perspective, no opportunity to work, to get self-confidence by going to school or by working. And this is a difficult situation that is even getting more problematic by the corona situation.
Yes, of course. Lyane, let me ask you, much remains hidden because women don't report the incidents, as we could hear from Elaine, but the same case, I think, is everywhere, actually. Does this fact behave differently in different countries? Do you have an overview on this kind of issue?
I don't think that there are great differences in different countries. It's about the kind of crime you're affected by. And in the field of domestic violence, we see very low report rates. It's about the kind of crime. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with access to justice. Okay. So we have a strong rule of law in Germany and Austria and other Western countries that prohibits private violence. And it is crucial for the effectiveness of this prohibition that violations are prosecuted. It is the task of the criminal justice system. But in many cases, the criminal prosecution authorities depend on input from the victims of crime. And this is especially true for gender-specific violence. It is often up to the victims to initiate criminal proceedings by filing a criminal complaint. And victims are therefore referred to as the gatekeepers to the criminal justice system. And this is where the difficulties start, especially for migrant crime victims and victims of gender-specific violence. In order for the criminal justice system, for them to work, they need access to justice.
Yeah, sure. Which target groups do you deal with in your work? Who are you not reaching and why, would you say, Lyane?
Could you repeat the question?
Which groups do you deal with in your work? And who are you not reaching with your work and why?
I do not work with victims personally. I cover the scientific field in Weissering, Austria. But Weissering, Austria deals with all kinds of victims of violence, but we are not specialized for domestic violence victims, but we run the nationwide victim helpline for the Federal Ministry of Justice, and we refer victims to specialized victim service.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Reem, you are now with us. Can you hear me? Okay, so maybe you can unmute yourself and maybe you can tell us about this kind of fact that much remains hidden because women don't report the incidents. So how is there actually a solution to this, to empower women to report what's happening with them? Where do you see important structures that are missing?
Actually, we focus in the work about the detainees woman. That's what I want to mention here in the panel about the detainees issues and the violence against the woman and the prison in the prison and torture and extralegal execution because that what we focus about the woman who is survived of Europe and Turkey and Lebanon from the jails. So there is missing lots of programs for the woman because they are in one side they are woman, other side they are refugee, other hand they are detainees. So this is program I see need lots of work.
Is there someone else who can tell us about missing structures in this kind of frame that Reem just gave us? Thomas Wenzel maybe, or Elaine?
Yeah, well, we see a lot of migrants who have been exposed to violence, not only domestic, also a lot of incidences of racistic violence, where we have the feeling that the police is actually not on the side of the victim. Austria, let's say, that's a big problem already mentioned by the Congress, and that is difficult to build actually trust. And we work in the documentation of sequels to violence in collection of medical evidence. It's very important because we can only really support and help to get protection and a note of distancing when we have good evidence, and that is frequently medical evidence. So we work a lot on the improvement of early collection of medical evidence of violence, also sexual violence. If you don't take the medical DNA sample right after sexual violence, then it's lost. So we are trying to educate everyone that everyone is responsible, for example, medical doctors and other points of first contact, to help to collect the evidence, and that is important in a rule of law system like Austria or Germany to give the evidence necessary for protection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we all have a role in addressing it. And when we see it, we all have to kind of like work together. And also, violence is not, just restricted to the home. I mean, there's a real concern now about violence outside the home and prejudice against immigrants and migrants that they face. I mean, I know now in the US, there's a lot of kind of anti-Asian sentiment, and there have been issues about, violence. So, I mean, violence is a major problem in our world. And of course, it happens in the home, but it happens outside the home too.
Yes. What infrastructure do victims of violence need generally? Where do you see important points actually they can address to? It's a question for everybody actually.
Well, I think the key for access to justice is the help of victim support organizations. Victims should have access to victim support services, regardless of any criminal proceedings. The EU directive establishing minimum standards on the right, support, and protection of victims of crime sets a mandatory standard here. Member states shall ensure that victims, in accordance with the needs, have access to confidential victim support services, free of charge, acting in the interests of the victims before, during, and a time after the criminal proceedings. For immigrant victims, the right to understand and to be understood is central here. This requires free interpretation services. But again, the question, how do victims access this support? Member states have to facilitate the referral of victims to victim support services. However, it is known from practice that victims also find it difficult to access these victim support services. In Austria, anyone who files a criminal complaint for domestic violence has their data forwarded to so-called violence protection centers. But this also requires a criminal complaint. Mm-hmm. In fact, it should start earlier. This should be done in such a way that institutions that care for immigrants network with victim support institutions and refer victims to them. But this requires victims to trust their caregivers. And I see many deficits here.
Yeah. And I think that victims are, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Just add what you want to add. And Mr. Kizilhan,
yeah, sure.
The hand. But please, Elaine, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it's important to educate victims. A lot of victims are really don't even know about these resources. And so I think that's a big responsibility that we have. And certainly immigrant organizations themselves can really help in this regard, because I think often immigrants are more likely to trust, other immigrants than they are with us, because we're seen, too much as like an authority figure who might, I know in the U.S. might contribute to their deportation. So I think they're much more likely to listen to and to trust and to use resources suggested by, another immigrant. And also the immigrant groups provide services in other languages. And I think it's a really good point you made, Lynn, about, having this free, these like interpretation services, because sometimes I think, we have all these different languages and it really makes it particularly difficult for immigrant women to get help.
Absolutely, yes. Mr. Kizilhan.
Yes, I want just to add maybe one or two topics which may be also interesting. One is the situation of refugees in non-democratic countries, so-called IDPs. And we did, for example, in Iraq with Yazidis refugee in the ID camps during the pandemic research, and it shows that about 20% it's a rise about depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and special suicide idea. So how we can do some prevention programs here. One point is, of course, also maybe talk about Afghanistan also. There's a huge problem, and we are not able to protect international political situation of the refugee, of the woman, and especially sexual violation in Afghanistan, which is really a rise. And I have no idea how we can to support those people in Afghanistan, Yemen, and elsewhere. So we have, two points. One is in Western country like in America, how you can find prevention programs and support for the refugees, especially women with sexual-based violations. And in non-democratic war crisis region, what is needed to do? Maybe this is Thomas, you have some experience in this issue. So I'm just wondering what is able to do.
Those are definitely two very important topics in very different situations. Thomas, is there something you can add to this?
Well, I think we could create long checklists for hours of things that are necessary in different situations. As Johannes mentioned, we also have to consider not only the people who come to Europe, but also the situation of the displaced persons that are the majority of the refugees are in horrible environments like camps in post-war, post-conflict regions in Sudan and other places. And this is a major challenge we also have to keep in mind. And we need different checklists for each situation, and they would be quite long.
It's true, but the question is also who has the responsibility? What would you say? Who is it?
Well, the responsibility legally is, of course, in the country who has the control of the territory. For example, if Turkey invades parts of Syria, it also has a responsibility for any human rights violations and for the safety of the people who live in the invaded area, as in the case of Cyprus or Syria now. So it's in principle the governments, but many of these governments don't have a respect for human rights or for women. If you remember Turkey, the place where the Istanbul Declaration for the Protection of Women was created, was the first one to abolish it again. And so to expect that these governments will take care of the women in their controlled areas is unrealistic, especially when we face legally tricky situations such as the country has not signed the Rome Statute, so there is no international criminal court and the accountability is not really given. That's very difficult. I think we need also very strong international mechanisms to put pressure, like in China in regard to the Uyghurs, like on Turkey and other countries who invade, that they follow their obligations under international humanitarian law.
Yes.
I want to second what you said. Now it's make so much sense. I mean, we can have our laws to protect people who are abused, and maybe they're not perfect, and a lot of women don't know about them. But we're kind of making an effort, not perfect, but we're making an effort. But in terms of countries that don't have laws that protect women, what can we do? And I think the United Nations, this is so much part of like human rights, which the United Nations subscribes to, and maybe it's part for them to take more action in terms of these countries that violate primary human rights toward women. And so maybe this is something we should try to expect and work and encourage the UN to take a more active role. And it's one thing to just talk about it, but another thing to try to deal with it in countries that don't live up to what to realize the rights of women.
It's true. Are there any efforts you can just see and observe in terms of UN women to strengthen, to empower actually this institution in terms that we see any, power behind this? Reem, do you have any overviews about this topic?
Well, there are a lot of initiatives, and even in countries that are very, should we say, have very kind of negative, aversive policies toward women. There are groups that exist, and sometimes they're really subject to a lot of danger. But there are a lot of kind of brave groups, out there. But I think maybe the UN has to just come down stronger. Of course, it's sensitive. As you know, there are 193 countries, in the United Nations, and many of them have different views, about women. But I think if this is, the UN is based on the Declaration of Human Rights, and so I think we have to be much stronger if we have to practice what we preach, not just say, okay, we're guided by this and everyone should be good. We really have to, the UN has to be much stronger in dealing with countries that don't follow this in terms of human rights.
And at this point, we can see how this topic of violence against women and children is actually mingled up with foreign policy as well. Mm-hmm. But let's go maybe into another question and structure, because Elaine was talking in her input about the understanding of the roles of men and women. So how can the understanding of those roles and role models and gender-specific role models can be worked on? Where and how do you try to start here in order to change actually the view on certain role models? Who wants to say something about this? Thomas, maybe you.
Maybe to mention, I think we discussed in the morning already, it's very important to reach out in the families and also mobilize not only the women, but also the men and the older generation who are the role models and the representatives of the cultural background. I think that's very important. And I think the Corona time, I think very interesting the project Reem is doing for online structures where women meet who have been in prison or have relatives in prison to build their self-confidence and get them information on important rights and also in strategies to build resilience. I think this is a very good idea to use this online media like we have it now much more. I think that's a good practical approach, because many people, the migrant networks usually are networking through the internet. So it can be used in a positive way. Also, you can use it, maybe you are out of the control of the family when you have a laptop somewhere and you can communicate with a group of other women or information givers. It's a great opportunity, probably, even in the Corona time, especially in the Corona time.
Yeah. If you have any questions or remarks, dear audience, just use the chat. I'm observing the chat, and we have, Ian Kizilhan is writing, Under Secretary General Mrs. Pramila Patton, Mrs. Patton, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict at UN, is the person that can be contacted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is important information. Any other questions or remarks?
I just want to make a little comment about what Thomas said. And that was really a very good idea about how, and I said a little bit about how, and initially it was only kind of women who focused on family violence, but now it's been expanded and we work more with men. And I think it's a great idea in terms of having role models, kind of older immigrant men, should come out like more publicly about family violence. And maybe that's a way to really try to kind of work with families in terms of reducing violence among immigrants. So I just wanted to underscore and second, that's a great idea, Thomas.
Is there anyone who can tell us about experiences with this kind of way? Some best practice?
Maybe we can, of course, mention our MIMI project, which means we are working directly with migrants, with women, to train them and train their own people about the impact of sexual violation, about the cultural impact and how we can change the mentality and the consciousness to be different and deal in tolerance and respect with each other with non-violence methods. In a clinic aspect, we know if someone have a psychological disorders because of sexual violation or traumatized. So we need special experts who are well known in transcultural psychiatry, known because the aspect of psychology and understanding of illness and working with illness is different in different cultures. So we sometimes are facing some diagnostic problems when someone is telling us a story about a psychological disorder. For example, the German doctor is not understanding it because he's explaining different. And this different makes therapy very difficult. And so far we need more cultural competence people in all areas when we're working with women and non-women. And I was just add one point, which is really in perspective of psychotherapy, very important, the case of sexual violation, shame, and culture. So we know from our own researchers, if they face some sexual violation, they are on the background of the culture. They became more ashamed, they become more tension in their body, and we have a rise of so-called dissociations by women from traditional cultures. And sometimes we are very surprised because we don't know how to work with them. We have some patients, we have some dissociation 50 to 20 times a day. So how we can integrate them into school and working everyday life. So we need in areas, some special knowledge that we have, but you have to train more people to get access to have more experts. Another issue is, of course, to have interpreters. Interpreters just don't mean to interpret from one language to another language. You can imagine how it will be difficult if you have a translator, interpreter, who will interpret 8 hours traumatized people's story. So he needs some special help, supervision maybe, and to learn how to speak. The second, the interpreter, we know from Afghan, from Dari, from Kurdish, we don't have so much psychological words. We don't have some words for depression or anxiety or different meanings. So we don't need just interpreters, we need interpreters who can translate from one culture to another culture in psychological and medical topics. So there are many things that we need to rebuild the concept of health system in America or in Europe. And we are still in the beginning. Just for Germany, we have 25 million people with migrant backgrounds. Only in 2015-16, about 1 million refugees came at once in one time. And the health system was not ready and prepared to support them. So there are many things to do. We know how to do, but we need more budget, we need more personnel, we need more staff, and we need a political decision to give more sources to refugee centers, to traumatized centers, to clinical and hospitals to be able to help them. We know all if someone is not healthy, so it will be very difficult to integrate them in a society or to learn a different language. So the integration of refugees started to be able to give them a very good sources and health system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yeah, that gave us a very good overview what needs to be done. But also prevention is a big topic, actually. Where do you see, in terms of prevention, important points that have to be built up? What kind of infrastructure do we need? What kind of topics do we need in terms of prevention? How to work in that field? Who wants to say something? Reem, what about you?
Well,
Sorry?
you want me? Or hello? You want me?
Well, I was asking Reem, actually Alksiri, because we haven't heard.
Oh, okay. Okay, sure.
But I don't think she wanted to answer.
Yeah, I agree with the Professor Jan. And only I want to add also training about the law and international law and the agreement for the international women's agreement. The woman needs training, building capacity, improving the knowledge about the law, the international law and women rights.
Yes.
I think, and I mean, I think prevention begins very early. I mean, we have to think talking about it in grammar school and early. I mean, kids have to learn about, potential, violence and about being kind of nice to each other. I guess really from very, very early years. So I think this is something that, long-term way to deal with family violence is we need to, really focus on education at a very young age.
But again, maybe Jan Kizilhan can tell us about his experiences talking about, well, sexuality, shame, body. It's actually a very intimate thing. And you talked already about the interpreters that are needed for this. People who have the sensibility actually to translate those kind of things into another language and culture. Can you tell us where and how does it work really good? How do people try to address certain people to talk about those kind of topics? You have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you right now.
Yes. From my experience in Iraq and also in a clinic that I'm working now for 20 years, First, there's a lot of taboos because of shame, of cultural issues, and they are worried they will be not be. So we as an expert should be able to be sensitive enough to listen and to break this taboo, because we have to talk about it. But they need a space, a room to not be ashamed and to get in dialogue. And someone telling me after sexual violation and rape by the IS in Syria and Iraq, some women, we are now we lost our order. They told me this. And I asked them, who lost actually his or her honor? You, because you couldn't not defend you. You were not able to do anything. And those people who did this, they lost their order. So we have to change the mentality and the dialogue and the ideas that I have. And we can do this as psychologists and psychotherapists and psychiatrists. But this is a closed room. What will happen after they are leaving the hospital or the treatment area? Mm-hmm. So there's a huge responsibility by the society. If you want to change people who are affected by sexual violations, we have to integrate all society and change the mentality, because this is something very different. Just again, give you the issue of the Yazidis in 2014 when thousands of women and girls were raped by the Yazidis. We were not sure if the Yazidi society will accept them, because it's a patriarchal society, it's an old society, that they are very isolated. And so we started to talk with the highest priest, with the council of the Yazidis, and say, look, this is not the fault of the women and girls. And you cannot expel your own girls and women and wives. So maybe it's a time in a crisis to change your society or the rules. And after hard discussion with them about 3 or 4 months, the higher council of the Yazid said, yes, after 800 years, it's a change of a paradigm. We will change these rules, accept this women, to welcome them in our society. So therapy is always a part of changing the society. You cannot do this in a closed room. And we can do this in Europe because we have the possibilities, or in America, in democratic countries, to discuss with them. But never forget the empowerment of this woman and the support of this woman to be a part of changing this society. And maybe this is important. So just thinking in short or close categories will not help us very effectful. We have to think in political issues, in social issues, and of course in medical and psychological issues. Then we can build a framework to be really help those people who are affected by sexual violence.
That means to include also stakeholders, important persons, exactly, in those cultures. Thomas Wenzel, can you tell us about the issue of including society and questions that actually should deal society with? Any expectations you have?
Well, I think I want to take up what Elaine and you have said. It's about the stigmatization of the female body in general. And there are a lot of practices that contribute to this stigmatization. I know that from Nepal, where we collaborate with women's group who go in the villages, where you have this menstrual segregation, where the men have the fantasy, the women has to stay in this house outside of the village during menstruation, and then you have pneumonia and snake bite, and many are killed effect. And it's very dangerous. And this is some neglected area, the menstruation, but it's part of the stigmatization of the human body in general. And in this case, the idea of the man is a fantasy, the health belief model that needs to be changed, is that when the woman is in the house during menstruation, the cows get sick and they are living together with humans. So this must be addressed in the villages, in the communities at an early stage. That there's a clear signal by the whole community, we agree on it, and that the children already learn it from an early age on when they get their imprinting. I think that's very important.
That's a big challenge. How is this to be done and organized is the question. Again, I think UN Women and Co actually should be much stronger in those kind of things. Anything to add, Elaine?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, Thomas, I know when I had heard about this, how women were really ostracized and how dangerous it is. And I don't know, and it's hard for me to think about how to address this. I mean, one thing I should say, there's a major conference going on at the United Nations next month. If you are interested in going to there are 750 side events that are parallel events we're putting on. If you are interested in, in going, and maybe I'm going to look carefully, maybe there's someone who's addressing more this issue. I also wanted to say, to respond a little bit to something that Dr. Kizilhan had said before, just the importance of working, I guess, with all stakeholders. I mean, it's fine for us all to come together, psychologists, right, and social workers, and lawyers and medical people, but we also need to have like politicians and political leaders, and we need to really talk and to work with them, because otherwise we're not going to be able to address some of these issues. So I thank you for bringing up that point. Right. It's a political issue. I mean, it's not just, a social issue.
So that would be actually my next question. How do you try within your work actually to convince politicians that much more resources are needed here? Is there a connection between the things you are doing within your framework and political, let's say, people who are engaged politically, activists? Where do they try actually to move things? Lyane, do you see any connections actually?
Yeah, for instance, working in Weisering, Austria also means to address politicians, and we do that for many times, but you have to be very patient, because we can only make baby steps. So, and there's one project we're working on, the referral of all kind of violence victims to an automatic referral to victim support services. And we are not there where we want to be so far. So we have to try again and again.
And I think, if I may suggest, and something I've tried here, sometimes, I mean, to change the whole system, the whole political system is so entrenched, it's difficult. But if you can contact one legislator and get either him or her to really, understand and believe and advocate for the issue, that can really make a difference. I think, they continually hear from a lot of different advocacy groups. But if you can find them, because, we elect our government to represent us, and if we can find one person who's going to kind of advocate for, for these issues that we think are so important, to take it on and to deal with it on a legislative effort, I think, level, I think we should do that. To just, if you can even this is something we try to educate and prepare students for, and we've done a little bit of this, ourselves, in terms of connecting with the legislator who will take it to the legislature and advocate for our positions, for these positions. And these will become like his ideas too.
Because all this has a political perspective, of course. As I see Ramazan Salman in our round right now, Ramazan, maybe you can tell us the Mimi project. How do you try to transfer this actually knowledge and this experience you have made already in the direction of politicians? Is there any communication between your work and that work that politicians can do?
Thank you, Shelly. Hello to everybody. I'm very happy that we can organize this conference. To your question, our problem is not to communicate our social technology to the authorities in the political sector. Because much of our programs, MIMI programs, MIMI is with migrants, for migrants program. They are at that time financing big parts of this program. And for some years, this was financed in Austria too for 3 years. But in my opinion, to finance these programs by political money is in the long-term way not very sustainable, you know, because one political party change, and then the next one says, okay, this is not my project. It's happened several times. And then you get a new party who helps us and so on. But then you begin every time to rebuild the capacity again, you know. And so I think such programs, if they should be sustainable, then we have to mix the financial resources. Because if only financed by one side, you know, then every time we are under power, you know, because we change with this program power resources, okay? And when we are sustainable with that, and we have only one financer, then they take finances back, and the old power balances are rebuilt. You know? And to change is we are not looking only to do something in the communities of the immigrants. We try to manage the relationships between the immigrants and the majority. You know, it is a very difficult challenge for the balances. On the other side, we have migrant communities. If you go there, there is much of diversity too, because not every migrant is a friend of another migrant. And so, how to find the right balance, you know, to bring people in that way together that they are really compliant with our technology, with our social technology, and compliant with other social. Because my problem sometimes is we are going as migrants to the majority, and we are saying you have to respect us. Our culture is important like yours. Okay, then we fight in any way for getting respect. But if I look at the migrant communities and I see anti-Semitism, I see that Turkish people don't like Kurdish people, you know, then we see that this challenge is more complex. And because of that, it's not only a work which we can do with the typical social pedagogic instruments, you know. You need a little bit more. And in the future, we want to develop a system in which the system is refinancing itself. I don't know why I have to go every time to the politicians or companies of the majority. If I look in Germany, there are so much migrant companies who are very rich, you know. And so I say, in the communities itself, there has to be some responsibility to share more responsibility, not only get money from the other culture and then get respect, you know. Sometimes maybe we want to do our own affair. And I told now on a level without knowing if my colleagues know our technology. Sorry for that, because I'm going inside this speech. I will send you, or you can see, I will send you an English paper on our program, because I'm very interested to share this with you and to learn from you for the future. I was for a while in the US, in Austria, in other countries, and I tried to skeletize the model and to look if this model is working in other countries, other cultures too. Then I skeletized the model and tested if it's possible to use this technology in different areas, in health area, in violence prevention area, in other areas too, and it works. And so we have research on that. 5 universities in the past researched. Thank you very much. I think I should stop here.
Thank you, Ramazan. As we can see, actually the topic is so big and somehow also depressing, seeing how many construction areas we have. Can you, in the end, give us maybe some hope with some best practice examples? We heard already from Jan Kizilhan how he works and what works really good. So maybe you have some experiences you can share with us where you see actually good beginning points, starting points to cope with those really big problems all over. Elaine, what's your famous project actually?
Well, how can I say? I'm involved in
favorite.
A favorite? Oh God. Well, I'm involved in education, and I'm educating, future leaders who are going to go out there, and work on these issues. I mean, I also have some contact with some grassroots organizations and some immigrant, organizations that are, that are working on domestic violence. And also just thinking about what I mentioned about education. Maybe I need more. Okay, I work on education. I'm in higher education, but maybe I need to think about thinking about prevention. Maybe I should focus more, learning more, getting more involved with education in primary schools to really work on prevention of family violence. To really get it, before it actually begins to work. To work with kids.
Also to work with parents, not only with
exactly right. And so that's really, I think that's really important that we shouldn't wait till it becomes a major problem. Very often we work with them when they become problems. We don't try to go back and kind of, I don't know, this is maybe an American nipping in the bud. I mean, when it's just starting, we don't try to address it. So this is something that, that we should do. Yeah. So this is, I guess, a takeaway message for me. I have to think more in terms of, if I really believe in prevention, about different ways I can work more on prevention, and maybe through, in terms of looking more at early education. And I don't know, it's interesting how we get in our own little silos, and I don't know too much about early education. And maybe this is a new frontier for us in terms of addressing family violence issues.
Thomas, where do you see best practice examples you can share with us?
Well, I think about education, I think also the social media are a great challenge and opportunity here at the moment in Corona times especially. And what I personally like is just a selection of many possible good examples is the accountability initiative that, for example, in universal jurisdiction, we say the perpetrator will not be safe. He will be taken to court, and there is no impunity anymore. And even if there is no sufficient justice in the country, then it can be taken up by international bodies or in other countries. It's a new development, and I like that very much.
Thank you. Reem, where do you see constructive points to start it? We can't hear you. You have to unmute. Thank you.
I think now the big project for me, the following of the woman as witness in the cases which started in Europe against the generalists who make crimes against the humanity, war crimes in Syria. So we offer the support, and we try also with Thomas to make treatment, psychology treatment, and we try also to to teach them the law and the international law, how to change to be stronger, not only victim, not victim, but survivor.
Yes. We got an example in the chat, by the way, a link, actually a good example how to work with children and to invite parents and to educate teachers at the same time, from Christine Fischer. Thank you so much. In the end, Lyane Sautner, can you give us some examples of best practice?
Well, maybe I can add a legal perspective. I think a legal system should not rely on criminal law alone to protect against violence. Another thing is security police law. Austria has a long experience here. It is possible to impose a no entry and no approach order on a violent offender. This instrument has existed since 1997 and has led to a paradigm shift in dealing with domestic violence. While in the past, the victim had to flee from the perpetrator of violence, now the perpetrator is forbidden to enter an apartment or dwelling, and he's not allowed to approach the apartment and the victim for more than 100 meters. And what is new is that the dangerous person must participate in a mandatory violence prevention program. But here too, a no entry and no approach order is practically only issued by the police if the police is called. So we are again here with the problem, access to justice.
Yeah, absolutely. There's somebody who wants to say, Udina Deephouse, please unmute yourself and then we can listen to you. We can't hear you. Would you unmute you?
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just wanted to give an example. I'm a professional interpreter, and I had once to translate at a German court of justice for a person who had been in a Nazi concentration camp. And this person was unable to speak, not only because of linguistic reasons, but he couldn't do it. And I think this applies for many, many women who have been abused or violated or whatever. And so I sat down with this person for many, many hours and listened to him until he gained some courage and confidence. And finally we could go back to the court and where he tried to get justice. So what I want to say is that you need to gain the confidence of the person who is a victim, and it may take a long time. And you need more people, translators, interpreters, who have the time to do this. And I think you have to associate them with the different help organizations. But I think it's very, very important. If you can't get the words out of your mouth, you're never able to present your case, and you don't have the courage to go against the person who did the harm to you. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good point. And something we don't often think about is so how hard it is for these victims to come forth, and I just talked about it kind of broad strokes, fear of deportation, fear of financial law, but there's something to think of fear that would just immobilize you from even speaking at all, because if you don't, as Dina said, if you don't speak, no one can hear, no one knows.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
exactly.
Complex topic. So thank you at this point. Thank you for this exchange and all the best for you and your projects. And I would just well, ask Jan Kizilhan actually to roll up and end up our conference today.
Yes, thank you very much. First, Elaine, thank you so much to be with us from America, and all
Great to be here.
participants, Thomas, Reem, Lyane, and all other colleagues and friends. Thank you to make it possible. It was really, it's amazing to hear you from different perspectives. I will do it very short. So in my opinion, we should be very gentle, provoke scientifically the politicals and the political situation, but always to be on the side of the survivors and give them the sign they are not alone. And this is the most important support that we can do. Always to be with them, to support them and give a sign you are not alone, but always scientifically gentle, provoke the society to break some taboos, and all norms and cultural dynamics then can be changed, and sometimes they have to be changed. And if we just give the sign of, and as Reem mentioned, I don't I want to say survivors, because they are fighters after so much tragedy and suffered. They go through the hell, but still they are standing up and they are there as a human, as a people. And if we are able to find some ways as a human, as an organization, through our activities to give them a sign they are not alone, that will give them hope. You know, hope is a motto of surviving of life. And this is what we can do, give them hope. And also it gives us a hope that the humanity can change the old values for a new living together, all together, whatever is it, men, women, children, sexual orientation. So thank you again to be a part of this huge and amazing conference. We started this morning earlier, and now we are on the end. And myself, I will go with a lot of ideas of projects and find new and old friends. So thank you very much and have a good day.